familiar faces and some new ones too. It's a huge pleasure for me to be introducing Father Robert Ombres, because he came just over a year ago, I think it was, to give a talk on Catherine of Siena. We were in the parish rooms at the time because this church was having a heating system installed, which you're hopefully all experiencing to some degree. Yes, Catherine of Siena's day yesterday, it's all very, very timely that he is here. The other thing I wanted to say is that these talks are a bit of a stab in the dark in a way, because each one is going to be intensely personal to the person who is giving the talk. It will be their own way of expressing their comprehension of the divine. So I can't wait. But what I would like you to do is to reflect on these if you feel inclined, and just to try to be aware of how you might catch glimpses. I'm sure you already do. So with no further ado, I will welcome you.
I'd like to thank Georgie for inviting me back. Always a surprise to be asked back. And she's so charming and imaginative and persuasive that I said yes. And as she's also just added, these are meant to be personal. They're not, as it were, talks about how one might encounter the divine, the extraordinary in the ordinary, but how this one, today me, has done that. And my job is to teach, and I teach here and there, and it would be dishonest to pretend I find that difficult. But I found today difficult, precisely because of this autobiographical element. And I think I've gained from it self-understanding, and I'll leave time for questions or reflections of your own. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen, but there's a haunting line from Auden, one of his poems, where he talks about making nothing happen. Well, that could be us today. It's not so easy as it looks. Has the sight of a sun in its glory, or the glow of the moon as it walked the sky, secretly stolen my heart, so that I blew them a kiss? For decades that's been in my mind. It's a line from the book of Job. I'll repeat it. And as far as I can remember, I've never mentioned it to anyone till today, when it came to mind as the first thing in organising my reflections for you and with you. What's happened is what tends to happen to most of us. When something goes painfully wrong, and we're believers, and of course, dressed like this, I speak as a Dominican friar, Roman Catholic, a Christian. I realise that, well, most of you aren't Dominican friars. In fact, I'm certain none of you are Dominican friars. No, most of them by sight. And this is part of the adventure of today, of being so personal. Now, but Job in this was universal. Obviously, he wasn't a Christian. When something very painful happens to us, or people we love, and we're believers, in some sense, we turn, if not against God, but in a very questioning way. And the first thing we want to do is that we don't deserve it. We don't deserve this level of pain, this level of distress. And this is what Job does when the misfortunes befall him. he immediately in front of God tries to justify himself. And the lines I'll repeat now are part of his examination of conscience as a devout Jew. That he was no idolater. He believed in the one God of Israel, the only God. But it looks, and the beauty of the lines betray a little bit his regret of what he'd done. I think he strikes me as someone a little bit still too attached to what he thought was a sin. Job before God then has the sight of the sun in his glory, or the glow of the moon as it walked the sky, secretly stolen my heart, so that I blew them a kiss. For many reasons, I start from there. Now, despite my blonde hair and blue eyes, I'm not the English gentleman you think. In fact, I was born in Italy and grew up in Italy. Not just Italy, but Naples, on the Gulf of Naples. And this is going to be relevant to the form, let's call it my spirituality has taken. George asked us not to be explicitly Christian. Obviously, I meet God chiefly in the sacraments. I meet God in prayer. I meet God in faith, hope, and charity. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. And the Mediterranean, in which I was born, and which I've never really left and go back regularly, means light. And that's the first element I'd like to reflect on you. And you notice Job caught himself almost blowing kisses with his hands to the sun and the moon. Light. One light so strong we can't look at it directly. The other reflected light. Think of the psalmist, in your light we see light. We're looking at the moon, we see the sun. No sun, no moon. Now in the Mediterranean, light is very important. And as I've reflected on this, it's not just that the light enables us to see other things, other people, the world, but in itself. I'll try and unpack that for you. In my case, it takes the form of being in the sea. Literally in the sea, in the Mediterranean. And I've always preferred, and this is generally true of the Mediterranean, that there are no long golden beaches. That's elsewhere in Italy. In the south, the Mediterranean, the beaches are often rocks. And vegetation grows almost to the level of the beach, if you like. And this is part of the experience I'd like to introduce you to. In the water, in the Med, the light dawns on you in every sense. Because for many months of the year, of course, it's cloudless, sunny, although the temperature varies. And of course, falling on the water, clear water, because where the rocks are is generally clearer water, there shimmers on the surface and through down 20, 30 feet, and you see the fish moving in the rocks. And in the Med, I like to turn to face the nature. So these are not miles of golden beach, there aren't any in that part of Italy. So here you've got a peculiar kind of intense vegetation, called la macchia, a special word for the kinds of shrubs and flowers, little flowers around the Med, almost to the beach. And light then, in itself, can be an overwhelming experience. Not only, I repeat, because of what you can see with the light, but once you become aware of the light in itself, the radiance, glory. And I suppose God put certain bits of the Bible in our heads for a purpose, and perhaps all these years of remembering Job blowing kisses to the sun and the moon might have been for today. Light then, in itself. As you see, I'm a Dominican friar, and our main theologian, St. Thomas Aquinas, another Neapolitan as it happens, perhaps not accidentally, who died in 1274. Don't know how much sunbathing he did in those days. Now, Thomas Aquinas, when he wants to explain how we reach God, how we use all that we are and transcend all that we are, he talks about light, lumen in Latin. And that's why it's not just enormously pleasurable to be in the Med, the shimmer of the waters around you, and the rocks and the fish, and this vegetation, and the climbing sun, and then the declining sun and the moon. But it's actually something beyond the pleasure of the senses. And in those moments, always pleasant, but occasionally more than that, they're illuminations. Light, illumination, lumen. Now Aquinas says we have a natural light, all human beings, I mean not just Christians, Catholics, just by being human, given to us by God, whether we know it or not, or believe it or not. And this he calls a natural light. That enables us to see the world as it is and others, and to understand it. Just think in a way, and since Georgie asked me to do this, I've been thinking about it quite a lot. When someone's trying to explain something to us, at some point we'll say, "Oh, I see." Now why? We're not seeing anything. Or when someone fails to understand, we say, "Well, don't you see?" Well, there's nothing to see. And that's, I think, what Thomas was pointing us towards. How vision, illumination, now I see, hasn't just to do with opening our eyes. In fact, it might involve shutting them in an odd way. That's the natural light, lumen naturale, as Thomas calls it. He then speaks of a world of a Christian, a world of grace, which nature can never give, biology can never give us, only God. Neither natural in that sense, or biological. And he calls that the light of grace. And it comes chiefly through faith. As human beings then, instinctively, but I think very deeply, we tend to say, "Ah, now I see," when there's nothing in fact you're seeing, but you're understanding. Well, Thomas thinks that's the same with faith about who Jesus Christ is, the Trinity. There we see, but at another level. But still light, lumen gratiae, light of grace. And finally, in the tradition he's in, Christian, Catholic tradition, he speaks of what heaven will have for us. And sure enough, it's light again. Lumen gloriae, the light of glory. Law of nature, law of grace, light of nature, light of grace, light of glory. And traditionally this is called the beatific vision. Again, vision. Ah, now I see. It all fits. And in the Mediterranean, it really has fitted for me. In England, with its veiled beauty, rather than the radiance of the Med, the veiled beauty of England, one of the moments which I think first of all, at a natural level, it's very satisfying, but now and then it's taking me beyond just for pleasure. Is to sit under a tree, surrounded by light. And again, been reflecting on this, and that makes me, by being under the tree, surrounded by light, makes me aware of the light, which if I'm in it, as it were, I won't be so aware. And sometimes this is a privileged moment when you realize that the senses are important, but the mind is also important. Emotions matter, but so do thoughts. And all this is taken up in some of those moments. And so that's the first experience I've chosen for you, and it's a repeated one for me, and it's from when I was a child and we used to spend literally months of a year, yards from the sea in Naples, in a house with family and so on. But it's continued, and I've been lucky enough to go around the Med from kind of Naples to Turkey to Israel. Always the Med, always the light, always the sun, the moon dancing across the sky. So the experience of light, I think, has been an important moment for me for sensing the human and its limits, the human and its possibilities. And that it has been extraordinary at times, and overpowering really. The other experience of, let's call it nature, which I'd like to mention to you, is, and this will need a little bit of unpacking, is the variety of things in the world, and of living things in the world, and the goodness of each. And how this, again, can say important things about ourselves as material and as living. See, the sun isn't alive, the moon isn't alive, the sea isn't alive, but they are things, and we are things at some level. And I think it's a pseudo-mysticism that pretends we're not embodied. Show my hand, my Dominican hand. No one just like it. And therefore, to be aware of things, as well as living things, plants, butterflies, animals, fish, birds, is part of how we make sense of who we are, and then whatever God, the divine, might give us. My first then major source of experience, if you like, is the light itself. Not just what it enables you to see, but to make you understand at all what it means to understand and to see. Now I see. The second is the opposite direction. This involves looking very hard in a detached, focused kind of way to sometimes very small objects. And meant to be personal. I happened to go to Italy in the autumn, which means I just see the Michaelmas daisies and then don't see them anymore because there aren't any in Rome. Now, I spent a long time in England looking at Michaelmas daisies, which of course all different. And unlike, say, Italian gardens, which are few and tend to be very formal, geometric, for me, one of the essence of England is the cottage garden, the rambling rows, the flowering bushes, a profusion of small objects, in this case living ones, and the meadow rather than the formal garden. Now what comes out here is the multiplicity of beings there are, each with its own goodness. By that not meaning moral goodness, but being what it's supposed to be. doing whatever it's supposed to do, whether it knows it or not, like the sun and the moon and the sea, the mountain. They don't know what they're doing, obviously. But living things, to different degrees, have more or less consciousness. Flower turns to face the sun. The root will push through concrete eventually to come out. Everything is itself which is living and wants to stay that way and maximize its well-being. And Thomas Aquinas teaches us that no single goodness could ever give us a sense of God's goodness. It's the multiplicity of different kinds of goodnesses that let us glimpse God to the extent we can. And to try and illustrate that, I've got a poem from Hopkins, a Jesuit. Shows you how broad-minded we are, you see. What a broad spectrum we cover. Hopkins, much influenced by Wales, Jesuit. This is probably known to you, Pied Beauty. And, well, I'll read it first with that comment, and then I'll say a few things about it. And I can't show you all these things, but try and imagine the ones you've seen. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple colour as a brinded cow, for rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire coal chestnut falls, finch's wings, landscape plotted and pieced, fold, fallow and plough, and all trades, their gear and tackle and trim. All things counter, original, spare, strange. Whatever is fickled, freckled, who knows how? With swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle, dim. He fathers forth, whose beauty is past change. Praise him. There you see are some living things and some inanimate things. And each has an intensity of being, which here the poet catches, and you can only do through long and patient observation. But just one clump of Michaelmas daisies, or watching a robin at work in your garden, that, if looked at long enough, dispassionately enough, will first of all remind you that you too are material, that you too are living, that they also, the trout, the finch, the chestnut, all have their way of being. And all that considered can lead us to God, as the poet says here explicitly. Let's call it nature, but particularly in my case, seen in terms of light in itself, and the variety of goodnesses, and dwelling on them, and not forcing them into any meaning or projecting your own emotions on them, but just watching them do what they do, on their terms, not yours. Not making them quickly a metaphor or a simile for anything. Trout's a trout, dandelion's a dandelion. And that's experientially not so easy, because we like to dominate. And one of the ways we dominate is to make everything make sense on our terms. Well, forgive this, but I've seen English people make long addresses to cats about how naughty they are for chasing the birds. Well, I mean, if a cat could speak, say, look, I'm a cat, this is what I do. But because we don't want cats to be cats, we want to be like miniature human beings, which is why it's so popular on television, I'm told, and in films. Well, they aren't really fish or animals, they're us. And and they have reactions like us, and we think, oh, that's all right, because then everyone's like us, so we are in charge. No, this is the opposite. You have to dispossess yourself, making nothing happen. But you have to make nothing happen. And in that nothing, which is a kind of emotional mental hygiene really, then something extraordinary might well happen. There are other speakers in this series. I'm sure the series will get better each week. We're certainly better than this week. And imagine just looking at their names, some I know, or their subjects or their job. Some will talk about human relationships. Some will talk about love. Some will talk about friendship. I've chosen not to. First of all, I find it very difficult in a formal setting with so many people, and most of you I don't know. So I haven't gone that route, but just to acknowledge that of course it exists and is important. But just think of Hopkins's poem. I mean, he isn't meeting anybody, he isn't relating to anybody. Just think of Job. I mean, he isn't with his wife or whatever, his relatives. I mean, he's with the sun and the moon, and he's with the trout and the chestnuts. And I just wanted to explore that. My second area is not unconnected, is art. Now, because I can't show you pictures, I'm not going to dwell on this so much, but just to say, it's obviously not a big step from being fascinated by light in itself to art, which of course works precisely by colour and rhythm and contrast and blend and so on, and involves vision, looking, the vision of the artist and the vision of the one who looks. In my sense of nature, which I try to illustrate to you, the variety of goodnesses on their own terms is crucial, because that dispossesses us, stops us making it all just an extension of our emotions. And I'll mention one painter, but I'll explain. It happens to be a Dominican, would you believe? Fra Angelico, Dominican friar, and me, never Italian as it happens, but from Florence, nowhere near the sea. It's got a river in it. In fact, I don't think you can have a beautiful city that isn't near the sea or a river. You ponder that. Including ours here, of course. So water seems to be crucial in all this, to beauty. Now the thing about Fra Angelico, it takes some getting used to it, most of his art. Partly because, of course, it's very Catholic, it's very Dominican, but also because it seems to be static. It's not narrative the way we're used to. But to me, I have spent a long time both looking in Florence and elsewhere for Angelica, but also from books. Again, it's a bit like Hopkins looking at the trout and the chestnuts. It's trying to get to the essence of what things are. And not too quickly bring them into our world, but to bring ourselves into somebody else's world. Like the hunting cat. I mean, he's not naughty, he's doing what cats do. It's just that we want the cat to behave like us, which is a bit odd when you think of it. It's the price they pay for being tamed, I suppose, for cats. They get guaranteed meals, but they have to pretend to be like us. If they get told off and are naughty. Now, one particular painting of Fra Angelico, I think I can describe enough without showing it to you. It's a scene of heaven. There's the New Jerusalem, a golden city on a hilltop, with a light, strong light. And it's surrounded in a garden, an orchard really, and making their way to the heavenly city are various saints, each with an angel, and it's like a dance. They go through this orchard towards the heavenly city. And that's one of, to the extent we can imagine heaven, is that for him. Now he's called Fra Angelico, it's a nickname, it's called John. But he was called the angelic one, the angelic friar. Like you might say to someone, oh, you angel, perhaps. And of course, many of your Christmas cards, whether you knew it or not, will have involved some angel from Fra Angelico, which you might call Fra Angelico. Now, what's the point of that, to experiencing something beyond us? We're on a scale of being, and we have to realize that. And not just in words, we actually have to experience it. So that we are material stuff, thing. It's brought home to us by the sun, the moon, the rivers, the rocks, all of which are inanimate. They're just things. They're there, but they exist. Then there's a scale of living things, from sort of amoebas to gorillas and us, a whole range, flowers, fish, and so on. Now, angels, I speak as a Catholic again, are part of the ecology, our ecology. But we tend to think of ecology as a rainforest in Brazil, or what's inside petrol, we put it in our cars. But that's already a hugely reduced sense of being human. Because we're material, and that's not an insult, it's true. And we have to become aware of that. We're living, and in many ways we're on the same kind of cycles and patterns of behavior as other living things, especially animals. We have to be aware of that, and not pretend we're something else. But we're also spiritual, which is where the angels come in. Because God is wholly other to us. He has no body, he has no biological rhythm, and he's not an angel. Because we're all created by God, but pointers to him once you're aware. And this takes many forms, but the first is to one's sense that as well as being material and living, we're also angelic. And not again to make him in our image, which is the easy route. Then you end up with a kind of Disneyfication of religion, where there are only chubby little angels who tumble about on t-shirts. I mean, utterly trivialized and tamed. It's always the power to dominate we have. We tame the cats, we tame the angels, we tame everything because we are in charge. And we know who we are. And part of spirituality then is dismantling all that, making nothing happen. Making space, which isn't just given, you have to make it. In Fra Angelico then, the angels are very present. They obviously have to be shown in some way, because otherwise you wouldn't know. But obviously that's not necessarily you might experience them. Now you might put this down to a kind of sentimental Neapolitan upbringing, but in their own way, angels are real to me, but not in a way that could easily be described. Perhaps something you might think is sometimes you're somewhere which looks empty. You think you sense there's someone here. You can't see anyone, or hear anyone, or touch anyone. You sense there's someone here. And some people are more sensitive than others. Others can bump into you and not aware you're there. Others, on the other hand, have this acute awareness. Well, angels and our presence to the angels and their presence to us is a bit like that. Once you dismantle all this will to dominate, this desire to have everything make sense our way, but to let other things make sense of us, it's a dispossession, it's not easy. And that's why asceticism usually goes with real spirituality. But I want to end with some things about poetry and words. Part again, I'm a Dominican, the order of preachers, we call them. We have OP after our names, it means order of preachers. We've been in Oxford, slight interruption, since 1221. But it proves that God has a sense of humour because our priory demolished 1538. All that remains standing of a priory of the order of creatures is inside the deaf centre. That shows God's got a sense of humour, but it could be worse. The Franciscan priory is underneath Sainsbury's. So I think God is telling us something. So words matter very much to us, and for Christians, obviously, the word made flesh, the spirit as communication, all that can be reached in some ways by poetry, and I choose that in particular, in itself. I don't mean you can have a poem about something religious. Just to have a poem at all is a creative moment. It brings to light that, I mean, you're hearing what I'm saying. In that sense, it's part of the senses, otherwise you wouldn't hear me. And if you read something, that's visible, otherwise there'd be nothing for you to read. So it brings to the surface of reality meaning. And as the poet said, we can have the experience but miss the meaning. How often do we say of someone, a bit of regret, perhaps to ourselves, oh, he's too young to understand what's happening to him or her. So they're having the experience, but they're missing the meaning. Of course, it goes the other way around. We can have the meaning, understand something, but not have the experience. And that's what I've been trying to illustrate to you, moments in my life where meaning and experience have caught up. I've actually experienced what some things mean, and I've been shown the meaning of certain experiences, but they don't always go together. And when they do, it's a uniquely transcendent moment when you sort of stop almost reading or listening with certain poems. Each will have his own and her own. But I want to conclude with St. Francis. I've been a bit rude about Sainsbury's and the Franciscans. I was literally born under a picture of St. Francis because my mother was very devout, devoted to St. Francis. So of course I became a Dominican in the usual way one pleases one's parents. And in those days in Naples, ladies had their children at home. You know, after I was born, she said, lady or not, I'm going to the hospital for the next one. So anyway, I was born at home under the picture of St. Francis, which I now have in my room, my parents being dead. It's Francis preaching to the birds. And other stories tell us of Francis preaching to fish. And of course, the story of the wolf, Gubbio, with Francis. So there are lots of, if you like, involvement with the non-human creation. What I'm going to do now to finish, speakers never finish when they say I'm about to finish. It's to cheer you up briefly, and then he goes on and on. I'll paraphrase it in English, very roughly. Then I'll explain a few things, and then I'll read it to you in Italian. And then there will be a stop, because and if you can't follow all the words were written almost 800 years ago. It says before Chaucer. In fact, it's the first thing in Italian, what you're about to hear. Under the pressure of his experience, Francis wrote this in Italian. No one has ever done that, ever, that we know of. A literary text in Italian. So it sounds a bit like Latin. And it came from Umbria, so lots of words end in U. Bless you. There you are. That's a word ending in U. Thank you. Gosh, we rehearsed that. It's 1:12. Yes, exactly on time. Yeah, this is coming to you live, by the way, despite appearances. This is Francis's Canticle of the Sun, Canticle of the Creatures. About a page, one of the most famous pages in literature, I suppose. And it was probably written at various times, but completed almost at his deathbed. But then he was blind and in immense suffering, unspeakable pain. So this blind man in unspeakable pain completed what you're about to hear. This is relevant as well. First I'll paraphrase it to you in English, then say a few words of commentary, and then I'll read it to you in your actual Umbrian. Praise of the creatures, praise of the Son. O most high, all powerful, good Lord, to you be the praise, the glory, the honour, and every blessing. They only befit you, O most high. No human being is worthy of naming you. Blessed be my Lord with all his creatures, especially for a brother Son, who is full of light and enlightens us. And he is beautiful and radiant and full of splendour. Of you, O Most High, he is the symbol. Praised be my Lord for sister moon and the stars. In the sky you've created them, resplendent, precious and beautiful. Blessed be my Lord for brother wind and for the cloudy air, serene, and for all kinds of times by which you sustain your children. Blessed be you, my Lord, for sister water, who is useful, humble, precious, and pure. Blessed be my Lord, for brother fire, by means of which you illumine the night, and he is beautiful and playful and strong. Blessed be my Lord, for our sister Mother Earth, who feeds us, nourishes us, and produces different fruits with multicolored flowers and grasses. Praise be my Lord for those who forgive for your love and who sustain illnesses and troubles. Blessed are those who will receive all this in peace, because by you they will be crowned. Blessed be my Lord for sister death, from which no living man can escape. Blessed those who will find in your most holy will, because the death of the soul will not harm them in any way. Praise and bless my Lord, and thank him and serve him with great humility. Dying man, blind man. Just notice a number of many things I could say. First, how such was the intensity of this experience that the formal language, Latin, which all learning took place, and documents and so on, wasn't enough. It couldn't express what he wanted to communicate. Then, notice it's called the Canticle of the creatures. He preached to fish, he preached to birds, he was a friend of a wolf. Not one animal is mentioned in the whole of that poem. None. No animals, no birds, no fish. Interesting essence. A lifetime's looking in Tuscany, now and Umbria, now down to its essence. And what is the essence? Well, notice there's 4 key words. Wind, water, fire, earth. The 4 elements which everything is made of. Air, water, fire, earth. That's through what God is praised. And to me, in preparing this for the first time, I saw a link, of course, to Job, blowing kisses to the sun and the moon. And here they are again, the sun and the moon, and the elements. But, and this is the line I haven't taken today, you notice that at the end it becomes Christian. There are many kinds of mysticism, and just to be human opens you to mysticism, to the transcendent. But to be Christian opens you in a certain way through Jesus Christ. And that's why at the end, then, he speaks of conversion and repentance and the afterlife, more than biology could ever give us, only God could. But I'll pause there to give you some time to ask questions, but I'll now read it to you. They say perfect Italian is when a Roman speaks Florentine. Well, you're going to get a Neapolitan speaking Umbrian. So forgive me, and remember this is it's pre-Chaucer, so it's as if you were asked to read out loud now some Chaucer. You don't just walk into it, as it were. But this is even before, and because it's the first known text in Italian at all. Incidentally, Catherine of Siena, Georgia mentioned, was the first Italian woman to write in Italian. These Dominicans do a few things. What we now call Italian, which is obviously just one dialect, which got supremacy over the others. Right, so now here's St. Francis there. Literally at the end of his life, living in a kind of shed at the bottom of the garden of Clare's Priory, St. Clare, in Assisi, which you're still going to see. Right. Altissimo, onnipotente, buon Signore, Tue sole laude, la gloria e l'onore ed omne benedizione. A te solo Altissimo se confano, e nullo uomo e ne digno te mentovare. Laudato sii, mi Signore, con tutte le tue creature, specialmente Messor, lo frate sole, lo quale giorno ed allumini noi per lui. Ed ello è bello e radiante con grande splendore. De te Altissimo porta significazione. Laudato sii, mi Signore, per sora luna e le stelle. Il cielo l'hai formate clarite e preziose e belle. Laudato sii, mi Signore, per frate vento e per aere nubile e sereno ed omne tempo, per lo quale a te le tue creature dai sostentamento. Laudato sii, mi Signore, per sor'acqua, la quale è molto utile ed umile e preziosa e casta. Laudato sii, mi Signore, per frate fuoco, per lo quale en allumini la notte. Ed ello è bello e iocondo e robustoso e forte. Laudato sii, mi Signore, per sora nostra madre terra, la quale ne sustenta e governa e produce diversi frutti con coloriti fiori ed erba. Laudati sii, mi Signore, per quelli che perdonano per lo tuo amore e sostengono infirmitate e tribolazioni. Beati quelli che sosterranno in pace, che da te Altissimo saranno incoronati. Laudato sii, mi Signore, per nostra morte corporale, dalla quale nullo uomo vivente può scappare. Guai a quelli che morranno nelle peccata mortali. Beati quelli che troveranno nelle tue santissime volontà, che alla morte seconda non farà male. Laudate e benedicite, mi Signore, e ringraziate e servieteli con grande umilitate.